I've had 3 children without anesthesia, but I can't quit smoking.
I've run marathons, but I can't stop vaping.
Beating nicotine isn't a matter of willpower, it's a medical condition. The deck is stacked against you with products designed to keep you coming back for more. Here's the good news. The RWJ Barnabas Health Nicotine and Tobacco Recovery Program can help you quit for good. Visit rwjbh.org/nicotine recovery. RWJ Barnabas Health. Let's be healthy together. Funded by the New Jersey Department of Health.
Prepare for glory!
I don't know if you got your popcorn ready. Do you got your popcorn ready?
I came out the womb, I was ready.
And he's hit the end zone for an unbelievable touchdown.
I would be honored if you played football for this team.
Throw it up above his head. They can't jump with me. Golly. Oh, they tackle him at the 40-yard line.
Who can make a play? I can. Who can make a play? I can.
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast, proud member of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. You can find them at FTFPodNet on Twitter. You can find me at SportsFanaticMB on Twitter, and you can find my co-host for the day, Mr. Matthew Fox, at Nighthawk7734 on Twitter. We are just one of many podcasts on this wonderful network. We've got the likes of Jim Day of FF Champs, Adam Ronis and Dr. Roto from Sirius XM Radio, Bob Lung of the award-winning Fantasy Football Consistency Guide, Dwayne McFarland, Blake Sullivan, and a ton of other great podcasts. Your one-stop shop for all of your fantasy news, advice, and strategies. And you can find us all on FullTimeFantasy.com. For today's episode, Mr. Matthew Fox, as I stated, will be joining me as we will break down 8 of the games from the Sunday slate. And then we will talk about some of the waiver wire guys you should be looking at, who we think might be repeat performers, what's going on with some of these other players, and then at which case we will finish breaking down the rest of the games and the Monday Night Football game on tomorrow's episode. So I'm going to go ahead and get him in here right now, and we'll start breaking down what we saw from some of the games on Sunday.
Hello!
And we've got Mr. Matthew Fox joining me today to recap some of Week 3. Matt, how was your weekend and how you doing today?
All right, doing pretty good down here in South Carolina for a work conference, so kind of adjusting to a new area. A lot of respect for those of you that are on the East Coast staying up till midnight to watch football games. It was quite an adjustment yesterday.
Yeah, I didn't enjoy staying up to till 10:45 last night and watching my Browns lose. That was not fun for me. We'll definitely get into that game. How'd your fantasy weekend go?
Pretty good so far. I have 28 teams. So far, 16 are guaranteed wins, 7 are already declared losses, and I have 5 up in the air tonight.
Yeah, so I feel like I'm sort of right there in the same area as you. So I have 38 leagues, as a lot of people know. I've got 10 that I know I'm going to win. The rest of them, I'm pretty sure I'm going to lose. So I'm pulling another like 10-28 week, which is not making me happy. I'm about to be 1-2 or 0-3 in a lot of leagues, and I just feel like this is not going to be my year. I keep unfortunately playing like the highest scoring team every week, and then some of the injuries, Barkley included this week, is really going to hurt me in a lot of my big money leagues. So I feel like this is just not going to be a good fantasy season for me, and I'm dreading it. I might just cancel the podcast and we'll return back next year, take a year hiatus, because this is not going to be fun at all for me whatsoever.
Well, it's still early, so you never know. You can turn it around.
Yeah, that's the one thing I keep telling myself, but then I go back and look at some of my teams, I'm like, you ain't turning that around, buddy. It's just not going to happen for you.
Yeah, mine feel a little bit like that too. It feels like it's feast or famine. I have some leagues that I'm like about to be 3-0 that I'm close to the high scorer every week, and some leagues that are just confounding.
Yeah, I think for me, before we get into the games, it feels like it's a weird year for me. Just going and looking at some of the high scorers and everything, I'm just like, I don't understand how some of these guys are up there. Maybe it'll level out. As you said, it is early. We are technically at the end of Week 3 with the game tonight between the Bears and the Redskins. But man, I did not expect some of these guys that are up there at the top to be up there, and I feel like maybe that'll level off. Like, for instance, Stephon Diggs. That's one guy that I bought into heavily this year in a couple redraft leagues. and he has just looked god-awful. Does that ever level out? I don't know, but that's one of the things that it's just driving me crazy this season, because I expected more out of him especially, and it's just not looked good. But we'll talk about him in tomorrow's podcast, because we don't have the Vikings on the docket for today. But let's go ahead and jump into our games of Sunday and talk about what we saw and waiver wire targets and everything like that.
First and 10 at the Lions 29, and Prescott goes screen right. Elliott down the right side to the 25, to the 20, to the 10. Elliott to the pylon. Zeke Elliott, touchdown. 38 on the screen.
Second down at 10, takes the snap, gives it, Chubb runs, he's to the 15, he's to the 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, there goes Chubb, he's to the 30, 20, 10, 5, touchdown, Chubba Lubba Hub! 92 yards!
Left. Marshawn Lattimore, 12 yards from Adam. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Caught by Diggs. Stay up. Oh my God! 30, no 10, touchdown! Are you kidding me? It's a Minneapolis miracle! Stephon Diggs and the Minnesota Vikings have walked up on the New Orleans Saints. It's a 61-yard Minneapolis miracle.
All right, so the first game we're going to talk about is between the Carolina Panthers and the Cardinals, Arizona Cardinals. Panthers pulling this one out 38-20. Really a surprisingly good game, in my opinion, for Kyle Allen coming in there, the battle of the Kevin Sumlin Bowl. For those of you who don't know, they were both at Texas A&M together before they both left Texas A&M. Kyler Murray going on to Oklahoma, obviously, and winning the Heisman. Kyle Allen goes 19-26, 261 yards, and 4 touchdowns to finish his QB4 on the week with 38.59 points. CMC continues to dominate, 24 carries, 153 yards, and a touchdown to get you 27.8 points, finishing his RB4. Curtis Samuel actually has a good day in this one. Wide receiver 20, 16.3 points, 53 yards, a touchdown on 5 catches. DJ Moore, 52 yards on 1 catch, his touchdown catch, to finish his wide receiver 31 with 13.4 points. And Greg Olsen has a really good game, looking like the Greg Olsen of old this past couple weeks. 75 yards on 6 catches and 2 touchdowns. We don't know how long Cam is going to be out, but with the way that Allen played in this one, do you still trust Samuel and Olsen moving forward without Cam?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, only 2 targets for DJ Moore. That's way off the pace that we had seen with Cam Newton. Cam's already been ruled out for week 4. Against the Texans, so we know Allen's going to play at least one more week. I thought he looked pretty good. I think the difference between you and me earlier in the season and how we viewed Carolina was I thought Cam was not healthy and it was going to hold them back, and you thought that they had a pretty good team. Well, it turns out when we see a different quarterback in there, maybe they do have a pretty good team. Samuel got a lot of targets in the previous weeks. It just was a matter of not connecting. He was able to connect a little bit better, 5 catches on 7 targets. And Greg Olsen, I think a lot of people were down on him this season. A lot of people thought Ian Thomas was going to finally ascend and either eat into that work or claim that job, and that has not happened. So I would say in a position we've always talked about being really rough, Greg Olsen might be one of the steals of the season so far.
Yeah, if you can still get him off your waiver, I actually know in 2 of my redraft leagues, he's still on the waiver wire, and I am planning on using as much of my fab as possible this week to try and get him. I mean, I have Mark Andrews in one of them, so obviously if you've got Andrews, you're somewhat good, although he struggled in his game this week. But Olsen has looked like the Olsen of old, and as long as he's healthy, I'm right there with you. I think the difference with Samuel and Moore is Samuel has played a little bit more with Kyle Allen. For those of you who don't remember, Samuel, obviously his first year in the NFL was out the entire year pretty much with an injury. Last year, before he came back, he got in a lot of work with the second team, which is where we would have seen Kyle Allen. Kyle Allen did look good last year, too, when they finally decided to sit Cam at the end of the year. Has come in and balled out. I don't expect him to take Cam's job at all. I did see some people talking about that. It's not going to happen, at least not this year. Cam is still the face of their franchise for now. But I do expect, especially with him being out there week 4, that they'll continue to be good, and then we'll see what happens moving forward. Maybe Kyle Allen goes out there and balls out again, and they're like, you know what, Cam? Let's give you a couple more weeks to make sure you're fully healthy. So whether Kyle Allen's out there or Cam Newton's out there, I think you can trust Greg Olsen because he's done it with both. And then Curtis Samuel, I still think is in the flex territory. DJ Moore, I would not be too worried about regardless. On the Cardinals side, Kyler Murray still continues to get it done for fantasy, although not putting up a lot of yards. 30 of 43, 173 yards in the air, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, adds 69 yards on the ground to finish his QB 13 with 30.8 points. David Johnson finishes his RB9 with 18.5 points, 37 yards on 11 carries, 28 yards on 6 catches, and a touchdown. Christian Kirk, wide receiver 21 with 15 points, 59 yards on 10 catches, and then Larry Fitzgerald, 36 yards on 5 catches and a touchdown to finish as wide receiver 25 with 14.6 points. The Cardinals as a team really are not looking that good. I mean, they're in their games, which is good for us in fantasy, but they're just not looking like they're going to be a competitive team this year. However, I feel like all those guys are definitely starter worthy in fantasy football. They continue to put up points. I am a little worried about DJ. He yet again just gets you a little over 3 yards a carry. So I fear for me, what I've seen is a lot of his fantasy production is definitely coming in the receiving game. But as long as that continues to come, he's going to be fine. Are you worried about anybody on Arizona?
Well, I think that there's an ongoing concern that we're going to have all season, which is the fact that they have a really bad offensive line. And when they play against better defenses, it shows up. I think there were a couple of things that occurred to me, watching how this game played out yesterday. Their defense is really bad, which means, they're going to be behind a lot. They're going to have to throw a lot. That's going to do some damage to David Johnson. And that line is really bad. And no matter how good of a running back you are, we've seen time and time again, a line that's that bad limits your opportunities. You can only dodge so many guys that are in the backfield. If somebody's hitting you when you're 3 yards behind the line and you get a 2-yard gain, in the stat box it looks like you can't run for anything, but you're killing yourself to get those couple yards. Kyler got sacked 8 times yesterday. Carolina has a good secondary. Also made me wonder if last week maybe was not so much about how much Arizona had improved, but the Ravens' defense not being what we quite thought it was, because we saw yesterday, which we'll talk about, they got absolutely destroyed by Kansas City, and prior to that they had only played Miami. So you come into the year with a certain set of, presupposed positions about how you think teams are going to play. Maybe the Ravens were going to see their defense isn't quite what it has been in years past, and that explains, in week 2 you're prone to think, well, Arizona's really stepped up. Their line has taken a big step forward. They're doing a lot better. Well, maybe the defense they were playing wasn't quite the defense we thought they were playing, because you see this week a lot of people, including myself, picked Arizona this week thinking, hey, they were really competitive with Baltimore in Baltimore last week. They're coming home. No Cam Newton. This one's they've got it in the bag. Their defense gets walked all over, and their offense can't hold up and just continues to get Kyler pounded. You saw that in their first home game with the Lions. If it wasn't for a pretty Herculean fourth quarter where for week 1 of the regular season, guys' conditioning is not where it is, and when you get deep in the game, they can't hold up. That covered over the fact that for 3 quarters, Arizona couldn't move against Detroit, which has a pretty decent defense, as we've seen. And if Detroit was more midseason conditioning, what would that fourth quarter have looked like? So I think it's going to be a long season. Kyler's a good player. There's some potential there, but it's going to be a long season. It's probably going to be a long season for David Johnson, too, because when you can't block, you can't do anything. As a Broncos fan, that's been the entire story of our season, and unfortunately, that's going to be how it goes for Arizona, I think, too. And they're going to play some tough defenses.
Oh yeah, that's where for me, like I said, David Johnson is going to really this year, it seems like, rely solely on that receiving yards to keep his or receiving game to keep his fantasy hopes alive. Much like I would say Phillip Lindsay as well in Denver, getting the more and more he gets involved in that passing game, the better and better he is going to be for fantasy. The next game we've got here is the New York Giants and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We'll obviously talk about the Barkley injury here in a minute, but it is Danny Dimes' first game and first win of the season. Got a little bit lucky, obviously, with the missed field goal by the Buccaneers, but Daniel Jones goes 22 of 36, 336 yards, 2 touchdowns, does get 28 carries and 2 rushing touchdowns as well to finish as QB2 on the week with 45.49 points. Actually, the first QB since I believe it was 1981 or the 1800s to start his first or in his NFL career first game and have 2 rushing and 2 passing touchdowns. So good on him. Rushing game, we saw Wayne Gallman step in for Saquon Barkley. Again, Barkley just gets a few carries before he gets a high ankle sprain, only gets you 7.7 points, and we've got even more bad news with him. We'll touch on that after we discuss the rest of the game. Sterling Shepard and Evan Ingram ball out, though, with Danny Dimes here. Sterling Shepard finishes as wide receiver 5 with 27.1 points, 100 yards, 7 catches, and a touchdown. Evan Ingram finishes as tight end 4, 23.3 points, 113 yards on 6 catches, and a touchdown. Darius Slayton also has a good game. Wide receiver 41 with 11 points, getting you 82 yards on 3 catches. I liked what I saw out of Daniel Jones. I was paying a lot of attention to this game, especially it being a game for the most part. Brings the Giants back and wins the game after being down 18 points. Great game for him, and the one thing I took away mostly was how mobile he was and how much how do I want to word this? How good he looked on the move, I guess. The way he was able to get out of the pocket, and one of the throws he made to Sterling Shepard was just magnificent. It's something we haven't seen from Eli in years, which does make sense. Eli is getting older, but I feel like this is the reason they made the move to Daniel Jones. My biggest question would be to them then is why you didn't just start Daniel Jones to begin with. Because if this is what Daniel Jones was going to be, you guys might have a chance to be 2-1 right now. Because they might have been able to beat the Cowboys. They were in the Cowboys game up until the third quarter started. Could have possibly been in and possibly won more games with Daniel Jones being out there, but this offense looks completely different with Daniel Jones out there. Sucks Saquon Barkley going down, but what was your takeaway from the Giants offense in this one?
Yeah, I think if you're a Giants fan, you have to be encouraged, not just for the fact that games might be more exciting the rest of this season, but for the future. Jones looked really good. I was one that questioned whether, you wanted to throw him out there with on the road against Tampa Bay. Well, he looked really great. Now he gets to come home to play against Washington. He won't have Saquon Barkley, but that didn't seem to slow him down. They did most of their damage in this game without Barkley being available to them. So, I'm not jumping on the Giants playoff bandwagon, but I think it might be a more exciting season. I mean, you can have a 5-11 or 6-10 season that's fun to watch, and that might be what they're in for at this point in time.
Yeah, definitely. The future looks bright. I mean, when your core is being built around Daniel Jones, who again looked good, Saquon Barkley, and Sterling Shepard, who hasn't, when he's been healthy, proved that he could be a very good wide receiver. Definitely a very good offensive core moving forward, and Evan Ingram. You can't even forget about that. I was with you on the starting him thing as well. I thought for sure they would wait till at least Golden Tate comes back and they've got some kind of weapons around him. The one thing I think you can say for Eli Manning, too, is Eli Manning hasn't had this team around him because Sterling Shepard went out in the first game as well. So there's no really way to know what Eli would have looked like without this full team around him as well, but Daniel Jones definitely looked good. On the other side, for the Bucs, Jameis Winston actually looked pretty good, and you would go back and think, he lost another game, but this game really wasn't on him. Drove down the field and put them in position to tie, or actually win this game with a late field goal. 23 of 37, 380 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception to finish his QB6 on the week with 37.25 points. Ronald Jones and Peyton Barber continue to almost completely split the workload here 50-50, but Ronald Jones gets you 80 yards on 14 carries to finish his RB20 with 13.10 points. Peyton Barber, RB running back 38 with 7.5 points, 48 yards on 13 catches. I'm sorry, 13 rushes. My goodness, I cannot talk. Ronald Jones does also get you a 41-yard reception. Mike Evans has a career game here against a really bad Giants secondary and defense. 190 yards on 8 catches and 3 touchdowns to finish as wide receiver 1 on the week with 45 points, which in return causes Chris Godwin to have a subpar game here, 40 yards on 3 catches, finishing as wide receiver 53 with 8 points. And then O.J. Howard actually makes a little bit of an appearance in this one after getting called up by his coach last week. 66 yards on 3 catches, 9.6 points in fantasy. I like the bounce back from Evans. I talked about it on Friday. There were a lot of people worried about him. I said this game he would have a bounce back. They did. Let's hope that this continues moving forward with Evans if you're someone who owns him. But what were your thoughts on Howard having somewhat of a decent game here? And I would imagine you agree with me that Chris Godwin is going to be just fine. It was just one of those games where they were heavily targeting Evans, and everything will be fine moving forward for Godwin.
Yeah, I feel like, when you look at it, Mike Evans got 15 targets. Nobody else got more than 4. It feels like maybe there was a decision made that either there was something they could take advantage of on the Giants' defense, or they really needed to get Mike Evans involved and going in this game, or maybe a little bit of both. And so, it's nice to see, I'm sure for fantasy owners who are on the verge of panic, Mike Evans and O.J. Howard are back from the dead. Howard gets 4 targets, turns 3 of them into 66 yards. You got to feel pretty good about that. Touchdowns are fluky on the tight end position. Week to week is stuff. If he can just get a few targets, I think it was in week 2, the real panic came from him not even getting a single target and playing a lot of fullback. So people are probably happy to see him come back. I think Winston, after a really horrific week 1, looked better last week, looked pretty good this week. When your team misses a field goal and 2 extra points and you lose by 1 point, it's really hard to lay the blame for that anywhere but your special teams game. If they would have made even 1 of those extra points, they would have been tied.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an embarrassment. But running back, still a quandary. Before last Thursday's game, I would have said don't play either of the running backs, and then Peyton Barber comes out there, runs for a touchdown, has a bunch of yards, and it's like, well, maybe it seems like they're going to feature him. Okay, we can put Peyton Barber back as a low-end flex, and now I'm back to I wouldn't play any of them. Ronald Jones got 80 yards. He had a 25-yard run in there among his 14 carries, so if you peeled that off, it's 13 carries for 55, which looks awful lot like what Barber had, and getting 1 long pass for 41 kind of inflates his numbers. It's hard to tell week to week. I think it's going to be a toss-up for both those guys going forward. Neither of them seems to want to take command of this job either.
Yeah, it definitely looks like it's going to continue to be a 50-50 split like a couple other backfields as well, which is just going to be maddening. Something that I'm actually hoping to talk to you and Tony about on Thursday is getting into some of these big timeshare splits at running back and some wide receiver ones as well, and where we should start panicking for certain owners of players. Will definitely be an interesting episode for us, for the 3 of us, and that is one of them, because I'm right there with you. As you stated, Ronald Jones 14 carries, Peyton Barber 13, so it was almost an exact timeshare between the two. Ronald Jones just had the 1 big run and then obviously the big catch as well to kind of put him over Barber. For the Giants, though, on their running back position, Saquon Barkley is likely out for at least 4 to 8 weeks. Has a chance to be longer. So he had an MRI today. It is a high ankle sprain, a lot like what A.J. Green had. It looks like there's going to be no surgery needed, so that is somewhat good news. However, you brought up an interesting point earlier when we were talking off air. Go ahead and tell the listeners that the thing that you kind of brought up about Barkley and coming back in possibly 8 weeks.
Yeah, they're saying 4 to 8 weeks. I saw someone say they think it's going to be at least 8 weeks because of where the Giants' bye week is. The question, when you're talking about, Daniel Jones, obviously the future at quarterback, but we already know Saquon Barkley is the future of their offense, period. So, if he comes back and you're looking at week 11, 12, some kind of meaningless games in December for a 2 or 3 win Giant team, do you even try to bring him back, or do you just wait? So, for Saquon Barkley owners, this is devastating, and it's not an answer you're going to get anytime soon. And probably, if you have him, you built your team around him, it may not matter for you anymore.
Yeah.
He's had a couple of okay games, and then yesterday would have been a pretty, iffy game. But now you're thinking about not having him for 8 weeks. It's hard, when you have a number one pick like that, and we're talking about a guy who was pretty much consensus number one overall, to recover and make the playoffs.
Yeah, so for fantasy, too, you got to think about, so again, if he's not coming back to at least week 10 or 11, you're talking about you got 2 weeks with him before you make the playoffs, assuming you're able to recover from that. Now, I can imagine some dynasty leagues, you might have a fairly good team or some depth built at running back. Redraft, I mean, that's going to be hard, because as you pointed out, you likely took him at the 1-1, unless someone, for whatever reason, was worried about the Giants' offense. Chances are he didn't fall past 1-2. So you likely took him within the first 2 picks of your draft. You likely don't have, unless you possibly hit on some of the late guys we've seen here. I mean, I'm torn. Now, obviously, you got to go get Wayne Gallman. We saw that he came in and played pretty much the majority of the snaps after Barkley went down. Actually, Wayne Gallman has been pretty good in his career. When he's gotten double-digit carries, he's always finished with at least double-digit fantasy points as well. So I do feel like if they rely on him, he will be someone that can get you some points. He's not going to be Barkley, but at least he could possibly fill in and be like a low-end RB2 flex option for you. So that will help some, and possibly he'll get you a big game here and there, but you can't expect any kind of Barkley production. So if you did have him, you need to go get Wayne Gallman. Hopefully you're in a fab league, or you're down toward the bottom of your waiver wires, or if you just handcuffed him to begin with. I know that's not really something you would have expected, because we haven't seen this from Barkley before. But yeah, I mean, even if he does come back in week 10, I don't know how much they'd likely ease him back in for 1 or 2 weeks. So assuming you make the playoffs, the first week you're going to get is week 13 or 14?
The Giants' bye is week 11, so what I was seeing today is they don't expect him to come. Most people don't expect him to possibly come back before the bye week,
okay.
Which means you're talking about not till week 12.
Yeah.
Most fantasy regular seasons end either week 12 or week 13, so you might get him right at the end. I'm not as bullish on Wayne Gallman as you. I think actually the reason Daniel Jones fared better than Eli Manning, I mean, if you look, Jones took 5 sacks yesterday against a not particularly ferocious Tampa Bay front. I think they don't have a very good line, and Daniel Jones has succeeded a little bit better because he's more mobile and able to get away. Right. Gallman had 5 carries for 13 yards. That, to me, doesn't strike me as somebody I think I'm going to rush out and get production. Really, if you're going to try to make any kind of move, you probably need to get somebody in. I mean, it's fine to pick up Gallman, but I would be trying to get somebody else in a different position that's going to give me more week-to-week points, because I just don't see. I think that's part of the reason we've only seen more human-looking Saquon Barkley the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, because the offensive line.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm just saying depending on what kind of league you're in, like for instance, one of my redraft leagues, we have 18 roster spots altogether. So and Wayne Gallman's already rostered. And so I can't remember exactly who it was, but I know a couple weeks ago the best running back available was Raheem Mostert, and I got him. I spent most of my fab to get him. There's not much left on the waiver wire. So at this point too, when you lose a guy like Saquon Barkley, you're just trying, I guess the best way to put it is grab anybody with a pulse at that position to try and help you out there. And so that's why I said him. I mean, just looking at it, so right now the best available in this league, there's 2 guys that I can see that I'd be willing to get, and that's Darrell Williams of the Chiefs, assuming that Damian Williams is going to be out for a little bit longer. And then they have Nyheim Hines and Dare Ugambawe, or I don't know how to say his last name. But so for me, it'd be Williams, Hines, and then Dare for me. And again, that's still, I mean, that's not great. You're not feeling good about, unless Matt goes down. I feel like you could feel good about Hines, but outside of him, you're really relying on injury with all those guys. So yeah, for me, the only reason I say Gallman is because he's likely going to get the bulk of the work there in New York. So hopefully he gets you some catches from Daniel Jones and possibly some goal line work, get you a touchdown here or there. If he can get you double-digit points every week, 10, 11 points, and you can throw him in as an RB2 or flex option, it's better than what you're likely going to get from someone you might not have on your team now, knowing you had Barkley. Because I do know some people, when you draft Barkley at 1-1, you kind of play a dangerous game of, well, you know what, I'm set at running back because he's going to get me more than enough points for a good RB1 and 2 combined. So I'm good to go, and maybe you wait a little bit longer and take a guy not until the 4th or 5th round, and now you're struggling because you've got Kenyon Drake as your RB2 and you're needing to rely on him to support your team at running back, and that's just not going to help you at all.
I do feel like I should take this opportunity to apologize to America because I'm pretty sure that I'm the reason that Saquon Barkley is gone, because last year as the vampire in my vampire league, I won 2 games. I was able to trade for Le'Veon Bell, who never returned and played a game, and AJ Green, who promptly broke his ankle and never played. And this year I won week 1 and was able to take Saquon Barkley. And in the back of my mind, I thought to myself, does that mean he's soon to be injured? And 2 weeks later.
So it's your fault then. That's good to know. I feel like we're about to lose a lot of listeners on this podcast now because everybody's going to hate you.
Yeah, well, I just don't want them to blame themselves.
Well, at least now we know. So now we know every week when we got to get Vampire League updates from you, and whoever you take, you just need to be ready for an injury to occur on your player. So we will definitely make sure to check in on that. So in case you win next week, we can find out what player you took and be like, all right, well, here we go. We're about to lose Tyreek Hill.
I actually have won the first 3 weeks as Vampire, so I've taken Barkley, Carson Wentz, and Juju Smith-Schuster, so buyer beware.
Well, I just traded Juju, so I'm okay with either one of those two going down, because I don't own Carson Wentz anywhere, so, I actually got Saquon Barkley for Juju, so go me, right? That's a story for another time. Let's move into another little bit of factory of sadness moment here, and the Los Angeles Rams beating the Cleveland Browns on Sunday Night Football 20-13 for the Rams side here. So the Rams continue to be money on the road under Sean McVay. They are 15-3 since he's become the head coach, but Jared Goff struggles again in this one, as he tends to do on the road. 24-38, 269, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 14 yards on the ground to finish his QB19 with 24.16 points. Todd Gurley continues to struggle here. RB45 with just 5 points in this one. Gets you 43 yards on 14 carries, doing absolutely nothing in the receiving game, which is just incredibly interesting to me. Yet again, we see 2 wide receivers step up, and one of them do absolutely nothing. In this one, again, it was Cooper Kupp and Brandon Cooks. Cooper Kupp finishing as wide receiver 3 with 34.7 points in this one, 102 yards, 2 touchdowns on 11 catches. Brandon Cooks finishes as wide receiver 11 with 21 points, 112 yards on 8 catches, and then that leaves Robert Woods with just 40 yards on 3 catches, and then 2 rushes for 18 yards. I feel like we talked about this last week, and it's going to continue to move forward. I think with those wide receivers, if you own one of the 3, you have to start them every week because you don't know who it's going to be. The past 2 weeks, it's been Kupp and Cooks. I do feel like those are probably the 2 safer starts. If you owned Robert Woods, would you start to waver a little bit about possibly putting him in your flex, Matt?
I don't think so. He had a huge game in week 1. I still think of the 3, to me, the safest is Kupp, who he may not have the highest ceiling of the 3, but he seems to have the lowest floor, and he's incredibly efficient. 12 targets yesterday, caught 11 of them. 12 targets to Cooks, 8 to Woods. I mean, they were trying to get it to Woods. They just didn't always connect. So I still think Woods, Cooks, you're rolling them out there. They're probably low-end wide receiver 2 or flex territory with incredible upside. Either one of them could end up as an RB1 for the week. You just never know.
Yeah. Are you worried about Todd Gurley at all? Because he did not look that bad, I felt, rushing the ball at times. I do think that the Browns' defense is a lot better than some are giving it credit for. They did a good job of slowing down. Still 3.1 yards a carry, though. I think his biggest thing is he's just not doing anything in the receiving game at all, which we saw that's where a lot of his value came from outside of touchdowns the first 2 years. Do you have any fear in him possibly not even finishing as an RB1 this year?
I actually don't think he will be an RB1. I think you're looking at more of a top-end RB2. And toward the latter part of drafts, I feel like that's where he started to settle. Yeah. I think, them mixing in Malcolm Brown, them not really targeting him heavy in the passing game is a strategy. I think they saw last year what happened when they went from 100% Gurley to 0% Gurley. It took a bite out of what they could do offensively, and they want to make sure that they can have 75% Gurley throughout the season, and that they're aggressively trying to protect him. And I'm with you. I think the Browns, they have some problems defensively right now on the back end. They were missing a lot of people last night, but they have a pretty ferocious front. They've been pretty stout. So the Rams were having success passing. They probably didn't feel a need to pound it with him that much. And, if you drafted Todd Gurley thinking that you had a high-end number one, or if you're in year 2 or 3 of a dynasty league and he was your first pick, I think this is moving toward a new normal. And unfortunately, that's what people are going to have to adjust to.
Yeah, the Browns secondary was decimated last night. I believe the only starting player that had been in there the first couple of weeks was TJ Carey. That they had almost had to replace their entire secondary last night. Just unfortunate injuries, concussions, among other things. Yet I still felt like they played pretty good. The offense, though, did not. Baker Mayfield continues to look like what Jimmy G looked like when he first came over to San Francisco. You would think he's putting up good numbers, but he's just not. 18 of 36, 195 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Finishing his QB 27 on the week with 16.2 points. Nick Chubb has a good day, though. RB 11, 17 points in this one, 96 yards on 23 carries. Adds 35 yards on 4 catches. Jarvis Landry and Odell both have subpar games here. Odell, wide receiver 39 with 11.6 points, 56 yards on 6 catches, and then Jarvis Landry, 62 yards on 3 receptions, finishing as wide receiver 48. We did see Harris step up in that tight end role with Njoku out. Will be out again for at least, I believe, until week 10 or early November is the first he can come back. So Demetrius Harris stepped in, actually looked pretty good there, did get a touchdown. Just the 1 catch, though, for a 2-yard touchdown. Finishes his tight end 20 on the week with 7.2 points. I hate to admit this, but I feel like we're at the point now where if you drafted Baker Mayfield as a top 5 quarterback, which chances are you did, that's where his ADP was going, was right between the 3 and 5 mark. It's time to sit him down. I don't trust him moving forward. This offense just looks completely out of sorts. I know some of it is the offensive line, some of it is the play calling, some of it's on Baker as well. I went back and watched a lot of different spots of this game, and for instance, the last drive when they got down into the red zone, they were on the 4-yard line. The last play before he decided to bootleg out to the right for no reason whatsoever because the pocket was clean. If you were to go back and look at that play, the defense was playing like a man coverage, and none of the defenders were paying any attention to Baker in the secondary, and there was just a wide open hole that merged right in front of him. All he had to do was run forward. He would have easily scored the touchdown, and then they would have had a chance to tie it. Instead, he bootlegged out to the right because that is what he has done throughout his entire college career and last year, and then tried to force the ball in. Just as a Browns fan, I hate that because I feel like you completely eliminate one side of the field when you do that. I understand that he's been successful with that. There was a lot of plays last night where he just ran off to the right side, brought Aaron Donald back in because Donald was continually rushing from the outside, and just kind of completely collapsing one side of the field and not being able to make plays. We'll see if that gets turned around. They talked about it a lot last night on the broadcast that if he gets the ball out before 2.5 seconds, he's extremely efficient after he's doing nothing with it. And I do think that's what's affecting Odell and Jarvis as well. What are your thoughts overall on this Browns offense? Outside of probably Beckham and Chubb, do you feel safe starting anybody else?
No, especially with the schedule they have coming up, I think we've talked before, the first half of the season, a lot of tough matchups, tough locations, and I think there's some growing pains. Might be time to sit him down if you have another option behind him and see if he can get back into a groove. Even Chubb has not exactly been the high RB1 that you thought he could potentially be. He feels like more like kind of Todd Gurley. You're seeing him settle into kind of that high-end RB2 range. Beckham, probably going to be a little boomer bust going through here. If you were a Jarvis Landry owner, you might feel a little more encouraged. 9 targets last night. He was only able to get 3 of them for 62, but we thought his targets might tick up, and he might benefit the most from Njoku being out, and that seems like that's the case. But it's really tough because you went into this season, the hopes weren't just high for the Browns as a Super Bowl contender. They were really high that you were going to have 4 or 5 of the best assets in fantasy. And they haven't been bad, just not been quite as high as what you hoped. I still think there's time for them to find a rhythm, to find a groove. This is only 3 weeks for this core playing together in games that count. But it could be a little bit before that happens this season.
Yeah, so before we move off of them, there is one thing I will say on the Browns offense, and I agree with you, that they have not been playing long together for the most part. The one, I guess, upside thing that I will say, and the one thing I am excited for, is after this week, starting week 5, we will get Antonio Callaway back. Antonio Callaway was a big difference maker last year, and it was an outlet that gave he was the outlet that Baker Mayfield went to in a lot of plays last year in big games. For instance, the Denver Broncos game. He was the one who got that touchdown. He was someone that would get open because the number one corners would go to Jarvis Landry. Part of the issue I think with the Browns offense right now is that Jarvis Landry is being forced to play outside as a deep threat wide receiver, which he is not. He is just not that good. He is a phenomenal, possibly one of the best slot wide receivers in the game. That's where he thrives. He's being forced to be moved to the outside for the most part because they just don't have the depth there. Higgins being out, Antonio Callaway with the suspension for, not substance abuse, but I can't remember exactly, the drug program, him failing a drug test of weed. So he is suspended for the first 4 games, this week's game being the last one against Baltimore. I would not be surprised if in week 5, unfortunately they are going against Seattle, but we have seen Seattle's defense is not quite what it used to be. If the offense doesn't look a little bit better with Antonio Callaway out there, because he is a guy who will likely be matched up against the third cornerback on every team, and he is faster, surprisingly, than Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry, and that could obviously open up some more space for him, and Baker will not be afraid to throw the ball deep to him. So possibly some better times coming for the Cleveland Browns offense. That's the one, I guess, ray of hope that I'm going to latch onto, but right now things are just not looking good for them. I'm with you. I really think that although Chubb hasn't looked great, I think outside of him and Beckham, they're the only two I would feel safe starting every week. Jarvis Landry maybe as a flex upside play, but even that I feel like is a little sketchy with the way that this offense has looked. Next up, we have the Cincinnati Bengals and the Buffalo Bills, which actually turned out to be a really good game. Buffalo really controlling that game for a long time before the Josh Allen interception kind of let the Bengals back in it. Bengals lose those 17-21. On the Bengals side, Andy Dalton, 20 of 36, 249 yards, a touchdown, 2 interceptions to finish his QB 20 on the week with 23 points. Joe Mixon actually has a good game. 61 yards on 15 carries, adds 34 yards on 2 catches and a touchdown to finish his RB10 on the week, 17 points. Auden Tate shows up in this one, wide receiver 35 with 12 points, 88 yards on 6 catches, and then Tyler Boyd just continues to do Tyler Boyd things, 67 yards on 6 catches to finish as wide receiver 27 with 14 points. John Ross slowed down in this one finally after 2 really good weeks, just 22 yards on 2 catches. Again, the Bengals, they struggle. Ross is disappointing. I was actually surprised that Joe Mixon had the game that he did. I was not expecting that. Your thoughts kind of on their receiving core. So we all know Tyler Boyd's an automatic start every week. Does Auden Tate showing up and John Ross kind of floundering here worry you at all? Does this make you want to take John Ross out of your possible flex spot, or is he good to fire back up again next week?
I think this is really a case of a tough defense. Buffalo has a good defense, especially a good secondary, so I think there'll be better days for Ross, and I think Tate probably more of a result of the matchups. They weren't able to go to the tight end that much, only one target for Eifert, one target for Uzama, so they were just looking for other places to go. It was probably good for Mixon owners to see him getting involved a little bit more. And I think my other takeaway here is, unless you're holding him as a handcuff, Gio to me is droppable.
Yeah, I know. That was one of the guys I was high on this offseason, thinking he could do something, especially if Mixon got hurt, but he has just not looked good, and especially
after the contract.
That's what I was about to say. They
got that
re-signing
contract
him.
extension.
Yeah,
they apparently re-signed him so that he had the best seat in the house.
Yeah, I guess so, man. I saw that extension. I remember we talked about it on the podcast. I was like, man, that might actually be even more value for him now moving forward. It's dropping Travion Williams down a little bit more, and then, he's just done nothing with it. On the Bills side, Josh Allen continues to prove he's a fantasy stud at quarterback. 23 of 36, 243 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Adds 46 yards on 9 carries to finish his QB 17, 26 points. Frank Gore steps in for Devin Singletary and proves that he's still got it. RB 12 on the week, 16.9 points, 76 yards on 14 carries, and a touchdown. Adds 13 yards on 2 catches. Cole Beasley has the best day for the wide receivers here, though. 48 yards on 8 catches. Again, getting targeted a lot here. 10 targets in this one. Doubles up the next best in John Brown. 23 yards, finishes as wide receiver 23, 14.8 points. John Brown finishes as wide receiver 47 with 9 points, 51 yards on 4 catches. And then Dawson Knox, a guy that I was talking about in the preseason as a huge sleeper. A lot of people were him going to Buffalo. His athletic skill set coming out of Ole Miss. Finishes as tight end 7 on the week with 16.6 points, 67 yards on 3 catches, and a touchdown. Obviously, I still feel like this Bills offense, although have a tough matchup this week against the Patriots, are all worthy starters every week. Let's talk about Dawson Knox, tight end, a weak position as we were just talking about a little bit ago. Possible breakout game. Would you be willing to pick him up as a waiver wire ad this week and possibly play him next week?
I think it doesn't hurt to stash him, especially if you're in deeper leagues. I would not be playing him next week. 3 for 67, a touchdown's nice. Had a 49-yard completion in there, which is going to inflate his stats. I'd like to see him do something a little bit more before I'm trusting throwing him out there. But, you pretty much got what you were expecting from the Bills. I thought we'd see a little better game from Josh Allen. He was fine, but he fumbled twice, lucky not to lose them through an interception. Turnovers have plagued him. Sloppiness has plagued him. Considering what we saw Russell Wilson and Jimmy Garoppolo do against this Bengals defense the last 2 weeks being at home, I would say this is an underwhelming performance from Josh Allen. I would definitely be leery of starting him against a good defense in New England next week.
Yeah, I liked what I saw out of Allen. He did obviously make his mistakes, although that is kind of to be expected with Allen. But I am with you on starting him against the Patriots defense. That's one of the teams I would not necessarily start him for. I mean, he's got the rushing upside there, which will likely help him out, but I would be worried about him throwing the ball against this Patriots defense, as they've proven that they are yet again one of the best defenses in the league. Next up, we have the Miami Dolphins and the Dallas Cowboys. A much closer game than the final score indicates. Dolphins 6, Cowboys 31. On the Dolphins side, Josh Rosen finishes as QB 28 with 13.8 points. Did sit out a couple drives in this one, or a couple plays in this one with they thought a concussion at the time, but does get 200 yards, 18 of 39. Did have a touchdown drop by Preston Williams. Kenyon Drake finishes his RB 33, 8.2 points, 38 yards on 12 carries, adds 34 yards on 3 catches. And then Preston Williams, again, finishes as wide receiver 42, another double-digit point week for him. 68 yards on 4 catches. There's a Devontae Parker sighting here with Josh Rosen coming in 56 yards on 3 catches. Again, the Dolphins, I thought, looked a lot better than expected. They really played the Cowboys tough for the most part. Really didn't start to unravel there until the end of the third and then the fourth quarter. For me, again, I would not start anybody on this team, but continue to watch Preston Williams. And if you're in a keeper league and he's available, pick him up, because this kid looks like he's going to be a stud. And if they get a quarterback in next year's draft and start to improve this team, just look at what he's doing with Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh Rosen. This guy could really be a fantasy stud in the next couple years. Do you have any thoughts on the Miami Dolphins offense?
No, I'm not starting anybody, but I think Rosen bears watching. Wasn't awful. Didn't throw an interception. Didn't have a fumble. So, in the world of Miami football, I'd say that's progress.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I thought he looked a lot better. And in all honesty, not to go off on a full tangent here, but I actually kind of feel bad for Josh Rosen. I was not high on him anyways coming out last year, but then playing in Arizona last year with the offensive line problems that they had, and then now coming over here to Miami, and now they're going into full tank mode, likely going to take a quarterback next year. I do feel bad for the kid that he's never really gotten a shot, because we have seen some brilliant moments out of him. So hopefully he'll continue to get a chance to play here in Miami and maybe get a job somewhere else next year. But that, again, we've seen with quarterbacks that stay on the same team and get new offensive coordinators or head coaches in 3 years. They just tend to struggle moving forward, so hopefully better days to come for Josh Rosen and his career in the NFL. On the Cowboys side, that was not an issue for Dak Prescott, though. With his new offensive coordinator, him and Kellen Moore continue to light it up. Dak finishes his QB 11 on the week with 31.29 points, 19 of 32, 246 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Does get you a 7-yard touchdown run as well. Tony Pollard actually outscores Zeke in this one to finish his RB7 with 21.8 points. Gets you 103 yards on 13 carries and 1 touchdown. Zeke finishes his RB14 with 15 points, 125 yards on 19 carries, and then gets you 14 yards on 2 catches. Pollard, 25 yards on 3 catches. But Amari Cooper is the guy who wins the day here. 88 yards on 6 catches and 2 touchdowns. Goes back to what me and Dennis talked about on Friday when we previewed this game. I talked about how I did not think Zeke and Amari Cooper would both have good games. I thought it would be one or the other. While Zeke still does come through with 15 points, Amari Cooper and him getting the ball as much as he did and getting you the 2 touchdowns really kind of dampered somewhat Zeke's day here. So obviously, as I said on Friday, I thought either Zeke was going to have a big game or Amari did. Zeke still comes through for you, but obviously you wish he got the touchdowns, whether it was from Pollard or maybe one of Amari Cooper's. Your thoughts overall on this Dallas offense moving forward? Again, now really getting ready to start playing some better competition than they've had the first 3 games.
Yeah, but they luck out with this Saints game with no Breeze. Bridgewater didn't look too bad, but it's not going to be the same team. I think Dallas is actually shaping up to have possibly a monster season. They've had an easier schedule, yes, but they also haven't really had to use Zeke at his full Zeke power. They were able to use him back and get him going. And, if I'm the rest of the NFL, I'm feeling scared. The one thing that you used to say is they were a one-dimensional offense. They are not a one-dimensional offense anymore. Dak has certainly looked like he's taken a step forward, and I'm excited to watch him play. I think they've been real fantasy gold. I know I have a Dak Cooper stack in a couple of places, and those are the teams that have been feasting so far.
Yeah, they have definitely been rock solid the first couple weeks. It's going to be interesting to see. Everybody said if they were able to go get Zeke and re-sign him, they would be Super Bowl contenders, and they definitely look like it so far. The biggest question we all had was what Kellen Moore could do, and he has definitely proven that he is more than up to the offensive play calling duties, and he has definitely shown out so far these first couple weeks. Next up, we're going to talk about the Broncos and the Packers. So the Denver Broncos get 16, Packers 27 in this one. The Broncos, Joe Flacco, 20 of 29, 213 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception to finish as QB 29 on the week with 10.02 points. Philip Lindsay has a great day, reminding me of Philip Lindsay 2018. Finishing his RB3 with 29 points in this one, 81 yards on 21 carries and 2 touchdowns, adds 49 yards on 4 catches. Cortland Sutton has a good day in this one, wide receiver 29, 13.7 points, 87 yards on 5 catches. And unfortunately, Emmanuel Sanders comes up a little bit small in this one, 10 yards on 2 catches to finish as wide receiver 88 with just 3 points. I did not get to watch a lot of this game. From the parts that I did get to see, it looked like both teams were going at it. It looked like a very good game. Obviously, Philip Lindsay, one of his touchdowns, he was literally thrown into the end zone by Dalton Risner, which was a little bit funny to watch. But what were your thoughts overall in this Broncos game?
Yeah, I mean, the Broncos, they're their own worst enemy. 3 turnovers yesterday, interception, 2 fumbles. They got the ball to start the second half, trailing 17-10, make a nice completion to Noah Fant, and he lays it on the ground, and pretty soon it's 24-10. I think the Denver offense is going to be tough to watch most of the season, going to be hit or miss, whether it's Freeman or Lindsay. I have been interested to see that this is 2 weeks in a row where Lindsey's getting goal line carries, which is the provenance I thought was going to be the provenance completely of Royce Freeman. So gives you more hope if you're hoping for more even opportunities here. Another solid game from Cortland Sutton. He's looking good. Sanders only 4 targets. I think they were really working to take him away. And the Green Bay secondary we've seen through 3 weeks is much improved.
Yes. Yeah, they're actually, who was it they were behind? Oh, the Bills. Those are the top 2 in defensive yards allowed, actually, in defense. So, yeah, Packers, very good. Maybe that was, like I said, I didn't get a chance to watch a lot of this, so maybe they were taking Emmanuel Sanders away, but Cortland Sutton is a stud. He was a guy I thought might have a breakout year this year. Of course, I did not expect Emmanuel Sanders to do what he was doing. I thought it would be the Cortland Sutton show with Deshaun Hamilton. I'm glad to see Sanders balling out. Better days ahead for Sanders, though. No need to panic on him. For the Packers side of things, so Aaron Rodgers finishes as QB 23 on the week here with 19.5 points, gets you 17 to 29, 235 yards, and a touchdown. Aaron Jones finishes as RB16 mostly because of touchdowns, though, in this one with 15.3 points, gets you just 19 yards on 10 carries and 2 touchdowns. MVS is the wide receiver of note here, finishing as wide receiver 10 with 21 points, 99 yards, 6 catches, and a touchdown. Devontae Adams struggles in this one, 56 yards on 4 catches again. Now twice this week and week 1, by far the 2 worst weeks he has had in the past 2 years, which may be a little bit concerning, but I do have a feeling I know why he struggled in this one. 59 yards on 12 carries for Jamal Williams as well in this one, finishing as RB28 with 10.6 points. Before we get to the Devontae Adams thing, actually, we'll start with Devontae Adams. I actually talked about this on Friday. So Vic Fangio, when he came over to the Denver Broncos defense, Chris Harris has always been, for the most part, the slot cornerback for them. Phenomenal cornerback, one of the best in the league. The first couple games, he was actually shadowing the best wide receiver, and that was working out well for them. I thought that he would shadow Devontae Adams. Again, I did not get a chance to watch most of this game. I did see him on Adams a fair amount when I was there, and I said on Friday that if he does, I do feel like he will be able to shut down Devontae Adams. Not that because Devontae Adams is not good. Devontae Adams is still a stud, but so is Chris Harris. And Aaron Rodgers is a guy who is not going to force the ball to anybody. I do feel like that's why we saw MVS take a step forward and have the game that he had. Are you in agreement with that, or do you think Devontae Adams possibly struggling with the new offense that the Packers are running?
No, I think coverage scheme had a lot to do with it. Plus, Bryce Callahan did not play again. Denver actually made a switch later in the game, putting in Devontae Bosby to replace Isaac Yiadom. But we've seen through the first 3 weeks when Yiadom is out there, he's just not up to the task of starting. He frequently gets targeted. He got targeted a lot by Oakland. He got targeted a lot by Chicago. He's just not able to hold up, and I think Aaron Rodgers, somebody who's savvy. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, I think, is probably a boomer bust wide receiver 4. You could see a game like this where, he catches 99 yards and a touchdown, or you could see much less. So I think that's going to bear watching going forward.
For the running backs, we've seen now, this is multiple weeks in a row, all 3 weeks, that Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams are in almost a complete timeshare. Again, if Aaron Jones doesn't get the 2 touchdowns, if Aaron Jones just gets 1 touchdown, this is a completely different game for them. Do you think this was more just a Broncos defense or something to start worrying about if you're a Jones owner?
Yeah, I think that is a little bit concerning. Obviously, week 1 was kind of concerning, but they were going against a good defense. Last week, it seemed like Jones kind of took a hold like we were hoping. Denver has a decent front, so we're going to have to watch. But there's been a long concern. Is Aaron Jones going to become the future guy? Is he capable of being the future guy? I think, unfortunately, through 3 weeks of the season, we're no closer to answering that question.
Yeah, for all the people who got excited last year when Mike McCarthy got fired and then Matt LaFleur comes over, everybody's thinking, all right, Aaron Jones is finally going to be the guy, and then he ends up right back in the same situation we saw last year. So definitely worth watching, and something that if you're an Aaron Jones owner, you've got to pay attention to. May not be the high upside wide receiver running back too that we all thought he could be this year. Next up, we've got the Atlanta Falcons and the Indianapolis Colts. Indianapolis pulling this one off 27-24. On the Falcons side, Matt Ryan, 29-34 for 304 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception to finish as QB 7 on the week with 35.7 points. Devonta Freeman has a bounce-back game, finally. 88 yards on 15 carries, adds 7 yards on 3 catches to finish his RB22 with 12.5 points. Julio Jones, 128 yards on 8 catches and 1 touchdown. And then Mohamed Sanu actually has a better game here than Calvin Ridley with 75 yards on 6 catches. Austin Hooper gets you 2 touchdowns with 66 yards on 6 catches, finishing as a top tight end this week as well. For the Falcons side, so I talked about this on Friday's episode. I said that I thought Devonta Freeman would have a good game here, and then once he did, it is time to sell and get out of the Freeman business because I just do not believe in him anymore. What are your thoughts on Freeman moving forward?
Yeah, I would agree. 3 catches for 7 yards doesn't do much for you. He had 88 yards, but he had a 28-yard run, so he had 15 carries for 60 yards the rest of the game. He just hasn't looked that dynamic or that special this season, and there was nothing really about yesterday that, oh man, I got to hang in there. I think you're right. If somebody got excited based on what they saw, see what you can get for him.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that might help Freeman moving forward is the Ito Smith injury. It's not serious, so he's likely going to come back, and if he does, that means you're likely going to lose some of the receiving work again back to Ito Smith, but if he does happen to sit out, that might help Freeman have a good couple next weeks, but if it were me, if you can, I would try and sell him now for whatever you can get, because I'm not buying in anymore to him being a comeback player of the year candidate like I was the season began. For the Colts side, Jacoby Brissett continues to ball out here. 28-37, 310 yards and 2 touchdowns. Finishing as QB9 on the week with 31.8 points. Marlon Mack bounces back this week, finishing as RB13 with 16.8 points, 74 yards on 16 carries and a touchdown. And then T.Y. Hilton, although he does get injured again late in this one, does get you 65 yards and a touchdown on 8 catches to finish as wide receiver 13 with 20.5 points. Zach Pascal gets into the end zone as well in this one with 53 yards on 2 catches. Marlon Mack. So a lot of people worried about him coming into this game. Does end up playing, scores a touchdown. Mack, are you okay with him? And then what are your thoughts on T.Y. moving forward? Again, injured again in this one. Re-injures the quad. We'll see where he goes moving forward. But definitely has had a lot of injuries the past couple years, seem to be piling up on him.
Yeah, you have to watch for Hilton's health, but if he's out there and if he's able to go, I think you have to roll him out there. He seems to be the only real consistent person in the pass catching game. It was nice to see Ebron and Doyle a little more involved, but each only had 4 targets. Unless they can get you a touchdown, it doesn't seem like you're going to kind of get the value you had last year. Marlon Mack, a guy I wasn't super high on, seems to really have a stranglehold on that job, and as long as he stays healthy, he seems like somebody who's going to be good to roll out there every week. He was involved in the passing game. A lot of people thought Hines might have a bigger passing game role. He had 4 targets. Mack had 3 targets, so it's not like he's stealing a lot of work there. I think Mack, when he's healthy and out there, is worth a start. To me, I also think Brissett, now that we've seen 3 weeks in there, especially with all the injuries we have at quarterback and all the questions and the matchups coming up, he's a guy that I'm feeling more comfortable about throwing out there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I own him and Kirk Cousins actually in a couple of leagues, and Kirk Cousins is riding the pine for me and enjoying it, at least I hope, with Jacoby Brissett going out there, because Brissett has looked amazing. Definitely looking forward to talking to Tony on Thursday about him. Again, I was one of the people who thought with Jacoby Brissett, I know we actually kind of talked about it. You seem to kind of come around on it there. With Jacoby Brissett and how good this Colts team was, we talked about them still competing to make a possible wild card team and be in this division. And he has not disappointed so far. Even in the game that they lost there, they were still in it till the end. Jacoby Brissett looks like he might be the future of that franchise moving forward. We'll see. It's still early, but I've definitely liked what I've seen out of him and this offense. The last game we're going to talk about today was supposed to be the best game of the weekend. I don't think it was quite as good as it turned out to be, but the Chiefs against the Ravens, Chiefs pulling out a 33-28 point win. Lamar Jackson on the Ravens side. So when you look at his numbers at the end of the game, look like they were actually decent. 22 of 43, 267 yards, adds 46 yards on 8 rushes, finishes his QB 15 of the week with 26.78 points. And then really the only other person fantasy relevant was Mark Ingram, who finishes his RB2 on the week with 35.5 points, 103 yards on 16 carries and 3 touchdowns. Marquise Hollywood Brown just 49 yards on 2 catches. And then Mark Andrews had a really bad day here, 15 yards on 3 catches. Might have had something to do with the foot injury, and Lamar Jackson did overthrow him on a couple of passes. For me, this was the Ravens' first test. We've talked about it many a times. I'm not trying to poo-poo on anything Lamar Jackson did the first 2 weeks. He has definitely improved from where he was last year. However, my biggest question was when they play better teams, what will he be able to do? And he did struggle in this one. We talked about it a little bit off air. I know you didn't get a chance to see some of this game because you were in the middle of traveling. I watched a lot of this game. His couple YOLO throws at the end of the game really bailed out his stats and team and allowed them to get back into it, throwing completely across your body, which is a huge no-no in the NFL. Snead going up and catching it over 2 defenders, and then his throw down to the goal line, which I'll admit was an impressive throw in the fact that he was getting hit and launched it a good 50 yards. But Seth Roberts goes up over the defender as well and catches it. Without that, they are not good plays. Not worried about Lamar Jackson. I still think he has that high, probably top 5 QB upside with the way he's been playing. Maybe this is his floor with what we saw against Kansas City, but they have a lot of better games moving forward. So outside of Lamar Jackson and Mark Ingram, does this worry you at all for the offensive weapons such as Hollywood Brown and Mark Andrews?
Yeah, I think Andrews, I'm not as worried. This is probably a product of he was questionable. There was some doubt as to whether he was even going to play. I think that factors into it. Still got 7 targets. If he connects on a couple more of those, we maybe aren't feeling quite as bad. To me, this was a big game because it was against a better team. But Kansas City, while they have a world-class offense, does not have a world-class defense. So I think if I was going forward, seeing him struggle in the pressure of a game where he had to try to keep up with the opposition even when they don't have a great defense would give me a moment of pause thinking about when they play teams, what's going to happen when they play New England, which has a good offense but also has a world-class defense. And I think this was another game that it's fair to wonder if Baltimore is improved on offense but has regressed a little on defense, which may end up catching up with them a little bit more in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, not to sound like a Browns homer, but I am a Browns homer. I actually think next week's game could be a very interesting game because I do think, in all honesty, the Browns defense, if especially they can get some of their secondary players back, have a better defense than the Chiefs, so it'll be interesting to see what they can do to this Baltimore offense. Obviously, the Browns offense is not going to be anything close to Lamar and the Ravens or even the Chiefs offense, but can that defense keep it close a lot like they did last year and give the Browns a chance to stay in that game and do something? On the Chiefs side, they just continue to roll. It's honestly a little bit ridiculous and honestly frustrating now if you're not a Chiefs fan. Patrick Mahomes, 27-37, 374 yards and 3 touchdowns and finishes QB3 on the week, 40.61 points. So there definitely goes that regress to the means attitude right now, at least so far, because he is on pace for 6,000 yards and 58 touchdowns. LaShawn McCoy finishes his RB6 on the week with 23 points. Gets you 54 yards on 8 carries and a touchdown. Also adds a little bit of work here in the receiving game. 26 yards and a touchdown on 3 catches. Again, a guy who is dealing with a little bit of injury as well, which is why we saw Darrell Williams in there as much as we did. 9 carries on 62 yards, finishing his RB15 on the week with 15.9 points as he added 47 yards on 5 catches as well. So definitely a worthwhile pickup. Off your waiver wires, a guy that could possibly as well help replace Saquon Barkley, especially if Damon Williams is going to be out for a couple games. We've seen Andy Reid like to run a more two-back offense. LaShawn McCoy injured again in this game. If he possibly sits out, it's definitely going to be the Darrell Williams and Darwin Thompson show. And Williams, the more bigger and stronger back, I would imagine he gets a lot of run if those two are out. For the wide receivers, we saw Mecole Hardman have a huge game, 97 yards, 2 catches, and 1 touchdown to finish as wide receiver 17 on the week with 18.4 points. Demarcus Robinson gets another touchdown in this one as well, 43 yards, 3 catches, 1 touchdown, wide receiver 33 with 13.3 points. And we saw Sammy Watkins is actually alive. He still plays for the Kansas City Chiefs, 64 yards on 5 catches to finish as wide receiver 40 with 11.4 points. I mean, just your thoughts all together on this amazing Chiefs offense, and can anybody stop them? And what are your thoughts on this wide receivers once Tyreek Hill comes back, possibly in just a couple weeks?
Yeah, the first thing I'll say is apparently no one can stop them, because we've been waiting for everyone to stop them. I thought Jacksonville would look strong week 1. They didn't. We thought Baltimore might look strong this week. They didn't. Also, that sound you can hear faintly in the distance is the Darwin Thompson truthers crying quietly in a corner. He was a huge popular pickup, especially in the middle of the week when it looked like both McCoy and Williams might be out. And it turns out if McCoy and Damian are both out, Darrell Williams is the one that you want. He was obviously the reason they felt confident enough to cut Carlos Hyde to the curb. So that was a little bit of a surprise. Wide receiver wise, Hardman obviously has some impressive overall number, but he got almost all of that on one 83-yard bomb. So a little bit hard to tell, but I like him. I like Robinson. I think if you have a pulse and you're lining up for the Chiefs at wide receiver, you have fantasy value. So the question is, when does Hill come back? What does he look like? Is he limited? Do these guys continue to have a role? I had thought in that week 1 when Hill went out there originally, Demarcus Robinson was the one that looked like he was third man up, which might give him more sustained value going forward, but we'll have to see. Watkins, I think you're a little hard on him. If I recall, he had 6 receptions last week for 50-something yards. I think it's just that week 1 aberration put him at a whole other level, but he's drawing number 1 wide receiver coverage now, and I think the reason we saw him thrive so hard in week 1 was Hill was drawing the number 1 wide receiver coverage. So Watkins is almost opening the lanes for Hardman and Robinson to me. And that kind of makes you wonder, when Hill comes back, are we going to see a real Sammy Watkins resurgence, because coverage will tend to roll toward, the Chiefs have a lot of poison. You have to guard up the middle to protect against Travis Kelce, probably the best tight end in football. You have to watch out for their backs. And then if you're having to roll your number 1 coverage guy to their number 1 receiver, that's going to leave openings for second and third options. I think what's going to be real interesting the rest of the time Hill is out is to see whether Robinson or Hardman can establish themselves in that number 3 role, because I think that is going to be a flex-worthy role going forward, especially with what this offense looks like.
Yeah, I think if I had to choose one or the other, it would be Robinson for me. Obviously, he got more targets. He's been in that offense a long time. Again, now a lot of people seem to forget about him. He was a guy that a lot of people have been talking about for years, actually, and really just this year has burst on the scene. Obviously, Hardman has ridiculous amounts of speed, I actually think he was targeted. He was actually targeted less than Hardman in this one. But I like Robinson, his upside. I am a little bit harder on Sammy, but that's just because his truthers are also very loud and obnoxious at times. I just don't believe in Sammy Watkins as a top-end wide receiver. I've always thought he's a low-end wide receiver, too. I don't think that's an unfair comparison to make or say that, but a lot of people still view him as that 1-year Buffalo wide receiver we saw where he just dominated the league there with Tyrod Taylor, and I've just never believed that. So I will admit, though, I'm possibly a little bit harder on him than I should be. Will be interesting to see. I know Tyreek Hill is already back without the sling on his arm now. There was talks that he might be ready to start running and doing some practice work within the next couple weeks, which could put him 3 to 4 weeks away, which would definitely be a little bit earlier than we all thought. So we'll definitely be interested because that's just adding another very explosive weapon to a very explosive offense.
Yep.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining me today and breaking down these first 8 games. I hope you enjoy the somewhat, possibly subpar Monday night game between the Redskins and the Bears tonight, and look forward to talking to you tomorrow about the rest of the Sunday slate and the Monday night football game.
Yeah, and, if it all gets to be too much, remember, you can always watch James Vanderbeek, also known as Jonathan Moxon, on Dancing with the Stars to get your football fix.
I'd rather watch an XFL game. Is that out yet? Is that soon? Next year? I can't remember.
Well, Antonio Brown's already working out for him, so it's probably soon.
Yeah. Well, let's not. I don't even want to. We'll talk about that on Thursday because I'm all Antonio Browned out. If I feel like you probably are too.
Yeah. Well, every time we think we can retire AB corner, he forces his way back in there.
I will talk to you later. Thank you, sir.
All right, take it easy.
Prepare for glory!
I want to know if you got your popcorn ready. Do you got your popcorn ready? I came out the womb, I was ready. And he's hit the end zone for an unbelievable touchdown.
I would be honored if you played football for this team.
Throw it up above his head. They can't jump with me. Golly. Oh, they tackle him at the 40-yard line. Who can make a play? I can. Who can make a play? I can.
Let's be honest, there are tons of ways to send money back home, and every company promises me the same things: good rates and safe transfers. That's why it can be overwhelming to choose a new way to send money. I switched to Remitly because I can track my money every step of the way, which means I know exactly when my mom will get her money. And with their extensive payment network, my mom can receive her money in a way that is more convenient and safe for her. You should check it out. Go to Remitly.com or download their app to get started. Remitly Inc. is a licensed money transmitter by the state of New York, California, Massachusetts, and other states.
Let's consider the secret life of the innermost nesting doll. Living most of her life in the dark, inside the other nesting dolls, she has plenty of time to think, if she could. Sadly, she has no brain. However, when an innermost nesting doll hears that Geico not only saves people money, but also has been providing great service for over 75 years, she thinks it's obvious you should switch. Because yes, switching to Geico is a no-brainer. Pity the innermost nesting doll and her lot in life.